Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's College and Research Libraries Forum on mapping library contributions to campus internationalization. I'm so glad that you could make it here today to join us in spite of our technical difficulties. We will be starting on time. My name is Sarah Steiner, and I'm the social media editor for College and Research Libraries. I'm going to be helping behind the scenes today to make... Oh, sorry, technical problem. Forgive me. Aviva, I'm going to go ahead and let you start this introduction.
Sure.
Because I'm having some problems here.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Aviva Weinrab-Lajoie. I'm the Director of Emerging Technologies and Services at Oregon State University Libraries and Press. I'm really excited today to help facilitate today's discussion about mapping library contributions to campus internationalization efforts. This is a really exciting and extremely timely topic, and one that is very dear to my heart. So I won't take much time, as you came here to really hear our panelists, but I wanted to talk briefly and set the stage for you for today's discussion. Stephen, Lori, and Liz's research really takes a systematic approach to understanding the extent to which academic libraries are involved in international and internationalization efforts. And our panelists point out in their lit review that there is a general absence of the library in university strategic internationalization plans. And their research really shows that the library often plays a significant role in campus internationalization efforts, yet lag behind campus in strategic planning and organizational efforts around that role. So this is really an informal discussion. So while many of our planned questions for our panelists are around the gathered research data itself, please view that as a starting point, and the field is really open for you to ask your questions. So let's get started. Liz, would you start off our introductions?
Sure. Hi, I'm Liz Cooper. I work at the University of Colorado, Denver, in Denver, Colorado, and I'm the head of research and instruction here.
Lori?
Hi, I'm Lori Kettner. I work at the University of Vermont in the Information and Instruction Services Department of the main library here, and I have subject responsibilities for environment and natural resources, global and regional studies, geography, and anthropology. I've also worked on library projects in Costa Rica for a number of years, and just returned from leading an ALA trip to Costa Rica with a group of 13 librarians who came down to work on community library projects there.
Great. Stephen?
Hi, I'm Steve Witt. I'm head of the International Area Studies Library at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and I'm also interim Japanese studies subject specialist. I've been in this position for the past 2.5 years, and it's a new post within the library as we've reorganized how we handle international and area studies within the library.
Well, wonderful. So let's just get started. So why did you choose to study library contributions to campus internationalization?
Okay, this is Lori. I'll answer that question. So in 2012, an C&RL, International Perspectives on Academic and Research Libraries Discussion and Interest Group was formed. And in June of 2012, the latest American Council on Education, known as ACE, report entitled Mapping Internationalization on U.S. Campuses was released. And it was quickly noted in the discussion group that although the report was meant to be comprehensive in scope, there was virtually no mention of the role and contributions of the academic library to campus internationalization efforts and initiatives. Others had earlier made similar observations about the lack of mention of the role of the academic library in the higher education literature on campus internationalization. So Steve then quickly initiated a call of interest in the discussion group in conducting a similar study focusing on mapping internationalization in academic libraries. The 2012 ACE survey results had just come out. The omission of the role of the academic library was glaring in the face of the multiple ways in which academic libraries of all sizes make contributions to support and facilitate internationalization. And so Steve, Liz, and I decided that we would like to document this in a systematic way that also at the same time allowed for easy comparison with the ACE study and ACE data.
Great. Well, would one of you take an opportunity to describe what campus internationalization is?
Sure, I'll step in on this one. Well, since as Lori mentioned, our paper is based on the work and the previous surveys of the American Council on Education, we followed their definition when we conceptualized our paper. So I just want to quickly read the ACE survey definition, which is also the definition we used in our survey. So we put this in the survey so people would know what we were talking about. So we define internationalization as broadly referring to institutional efforts to integrate an international, global, or intercultural dimension into the teaching, research, or services functions. And we felt this definition worked well both for libraries and for the academic institutions. And so it was a great definition for both surveys. And I also just wanted to mention a couple of other related terms that come up in this same sort of discussion. And one is international or global education. And the American Council defines that as a subset of internationalization. So when we're talking about internationalization, we're talking about the broader concept, and global education would be a piece of that that's more related to student learning, courses, programs, activities that bring in some international aspect to student learning. And another term that I just wanted to quickly touch on too is comprehensive internationalization. That's a term you see a lot in this area. And it's really what our survey and the ACE survey are looking at, which is strategic, coordinated processes. And I'm going to read this, also comes from the American Council, that seek to align and integrate policies, programs, and initiatives that position colleges and universities as more globally oriented. So that's getting at things that our surveys were looking at, which is like articulated institutional commitment. Is it in the strategic plan? Is it something that there's a focus on? What kind of structure and staffing, policies and practices, collaboration? So looking at that more holistic, strategic approach to internationalization, and that's what we're focusing on. And I also wanted to just mention that I think one reason that there's been this interest in internationalization for us and for libraries, and you just keep hearing about internationalization in the media too, related to higher education, is, we are living in this more globalized world, and the world is shrinking with technology. And being able to, I think, higher education is seeing that in order to create citizens and people of the world who can function and make contributions to society, internationalization is a part of that. So I think we're seeing that reflected more, I would say, intentionally in higher education these days.
Absolutely. I would agree with that 100%. So would you talk a little bit about the methodology that you used in your study, and just a little bit more about the study in general?
Sure, I can answer that question. As we mentioned before, we were attempting to replicate the ACE survey as much as possible. So we started by talking with ACE and getting their approval to modify their survey for the purposes of studying academic libraries. So we started with the ACE survey, and the survey focuses a lot on curricular learning outcomes, services, and teaching programs, also how faculty are supported, administrative structures, and such. So we attempted to modify as much as possible those questions into their library-focused analogs. So, for example, we focused more on things like library collections, services, instructional programs, but we were also able to include almost verbatim some of the questions focused on the role of the mission statements or administrative structures within libraries. Once we had rewritten the survey, we worked with the Survey Research Lab at the university through a grant from the library, and they helped us to modify the survey to make it more clear and organized. And at that point, we also decided to add some qualitative questions. Since with any survey, especially the first time we're doing it, we wanted to get a better sense of what people were doing and not assume that we know all of the parameters out there to study. So we integrated quite a number of qualitative questions as well, which really helped to flesh out our results. And then the next step was taking the survey and getting it out to the participants or potential participants. And we created a contact list through help of some other colleagues that have done similar surveys to send out the survey to library directors or heads at every academic library within the U.S., excluding community colleges. And that was a difference from ACE, which does include community and tribal colleges, but we thought we wanted to at least focus on four-year institutions and above, especially if you look at the ACE results. The response rates from community colleges and other types of institutions is quite low. So we sent out the survey and actually got quite a lot of help from other organizations in promoting the survey. ARL, for example, sent it out to their members to encourage them to participate. And then after we received the results, we analyzed using SPSS to begin looking at our data.
Well, wonderful, thank you. So how does the survey response impact the results of the survey, and what might it tell us about library engagement in campus internationalization efforts?
I can take that question also. Our response rates mapped fairly well with the ACE response rates, especially some of their initial surveys. And given that we were trying to query thousands of institutions simultaneously, it's not surprising that they were fairly low. But essentially, the response rates were biased towards research universities. We had a much higher response rate from those institutions. And the response rate for research universities that report having high to very high research profiles was at 32%. But what we also did was ask respondents for their IPEDS number, which is a number that the U.S. Department of Education uses to track universities and compile data. So we were able to compare the response rates with other sets of the IPEDS data. And it was interesting to see that within our response rates, respondents were more apt to have higher than average international student populations on their campus, which tells us that those who responded already have a fairly high level of internationalization or higher than average within their campuses, and then also are more likely from research universities. So we can't generalize our results, but it certainly provides some touch points and indicators that are worthy of further discussion. When we get to the research universities, that it's a little closer to being generalizable, but still not quite high enough, at least for us to feel that that reflects all institutions.
Great. So based on the survey, how do academic libraries contribute currently to campus internationalization efforts?
Okay, I'll take that one. Academic libraries make a host of contributions that can be considered internationalization related. I'm going to focus on the responses to a survey question that asked respondents to select from a list of internationalization related activities that apply to their institutions. And the most frequently selected activities included liaison work with foreign language and international area studies departments, providing instruction and orientations for international students, and collecting international and foreign language materials. Liaising with study abroad and ESL programs and international interlibrary loan and lending were also mentioned, but with less frequency. A couple areas that were also selected by doctoral and master's level institutions, but not by the smaller bachelor's level institutions, were participation in international partnerships and supporting international branch campuses. And then there were a host of other areas that were not identified as choices in our survey questions, but were written in, demonstrating that there's a wide institutional range of activities that are internationalization related going on in our libraries, including developing international curricula, leading study abroad programs, advising international students, and working internationally on fundraising activities. So to sum up, I think we contribute to internationalization-related activities foundationally in virtually every department of our libraries in supporting the teaching and research and service functions of our institutions.
Great. Well, could you discuss a little bit your results regarding organizational structure and staffing in support of internationalization activities?
Sure, I can take that question. We had a few questions in the survey that tried to cover this. For example, one question focused on the administrative structure of international activities within libraries. And the highest response for that, essentially over 30% of respondents stated there is no particular unit or individual that is responsible for internationalization activities. And the other area was inclined towards multiple individuals or independent work within this. So administratively, there doesn't seem to be any emergent structure other than a lack of structure for internationalization activities, which is pretty interesting when you think of the way libraries are generally quite structured within their activities and the role different units and individuals play. So I think that's certainly could be seen as a positive decentralization where people have the initiative to make programs or do international work, but it's also an opportunity perhaps to organize some of that work for higher impact. In addition, if you look at another question was the principal catalysts for internationalization within libraries. And that was actually most respondents noted that library directors were the principal catalyst, especially within research libraries. Over 45% of them noted that their directors were the catalysts. The directors were also answering the questions, so that could impact the results as well. But also, there seemed to be a lot of outside influence on that as well. Many respondents noted that university presidents or chief academic officers or international officers were catalysts to the library. So it seems to be that a lot of the initiative is coming from administrative layers within organizations. And if you look at the reporting lines of individuals whose duties include internationalization, this also bears out. Most respondents, about 50% in master's degree, PhD level institutions, noted that people who are engaged or responsible for international activities are reporting directly to library directors or deans rather than heads of services or unit heads or within other structures. So it seems to be that a lot of the organizational structure around internationalization, where it exists, is at the top layer, although activity is happening all across libraries.
Thank you. So could you discuss your results regarding perspectives from library administration?
Sure. So we felt that in our survey it was important to begin to explore both the role of library administration to campus internationalization and perspectives of library administrators regarding the future regarding future further engagement by the library in internationalization efforts on their campuses. But to accomplish this, we included 2 open-ended questions to allow for depth and range of responses. The first one, which addressed the role of upper-level library administration in campus internationalization, generated a large variability in responses, largely dependent upon institutional initiatives, administrative structure, and culture. Respondents indicating a high level of involvement noted membership on internationalization-related university committees, for example, focusing on curriculum and general education initiatives. They also noted direct involvement with university strategic planning and policy decisions, and direct engagement with university international student and study abroad offices. Additionally to that, deans and directors from master's and doctoral level institutions noted their role in developing and maintaining relationships with partner international institutions. However, interestingly, almost 1/3 of bachelor's level institution respondents indicated no involvement. That is, no direct involvement on internationalization related issues with their upper level administration, as did almost 1/4 of master's level institution respondents and about 1/7 of our doctoral level respondents. The second question that we asked, the second qualitative question, asked about further future engagement with internationalization. And that generated responses from bachelor level institutions focusing on support for the increasing international student population in a variety of ways, including through information literacy instruction and orientations, research guides, individual research support, and collection development for ESL learners. And also mentioned by this group of respondents was further support and involvement with study abroad programs and focused collection development to support global curricula and foreign language materials. Additionally, master's level respondents noted potential for increased international staff exchanges and increased support for international university partnerships, while doctoral level institutional responses included the responses I just mentioned, as well as developing international research centers and growing international digitization projects. Subsequently, in the follow-up interviews that I conducted with library deans and directors expanding upon this study, I also asked a question regarding the future. And some additional recurring themes from that data included a focus on leveraging library space more to support international initiatives in a variety of ways, the necessity of being an active partner in evolving internationalization conversations, and emphasis on collections, including the collection of language learning programs.
Great, thank you. So how do the survey results differ from the results of the ACE survey, and what might they indicate about libraries in general?
Well, before answering that one too, I just want to mention a couple of similarities between survey results between the ACE respondents and the library respondents. I would say first, something Steve mentioned earlier, both surveys had a higher rate of response among doctoral institutions, and related to that, we believe, both surveys reported more activity related to internationalization at doctoral institutions. But I think one of the key similarities is that both academic institutions and libraries reported an increase in internationalization activities and in funding and in optimism about the future. So I think that's really, it makes sense too, right, that if academic institutions feel that this is increasing, that libraries as sort of a support to the institution would also be reflecting that. And both also, this was key for both surveys, both reported that commitment from top-level organizational leaders, whether that be the university president or the library director, was key to internationalization activities happening. So I think those two things are interesting to note, sort of this synergy between libraries and their parent organizations. I think some of the differences is the reported level of internationalization. I mean, I think Steve might have talked about this a moment earlier, but the ACE survey reported 95% of doctoral institutions indicated high or moderate internationalization. And in libraries, only 39% of doctoral institutions reported this. And then if overall, not just doctoral institutions, but all institutions, ACE reported 56% and libraries reported 30%. So there's a big difference there in how much energy libraries are putting into this. Another big difference is it in the strategic plan? So ACE reported 52% of institutions said that it was a top priority in their strategic plans, but only 20% of libraries reported the same thing. And so, and just even articulating in strategic plans in general, libraries have a much lower rate. So I think this just demonstrates that libraries are sort of lag universities, which also makes sense that we're supporting them. So at some point, perhaps we will, our goals will catch up with our organization's goals, and that we're following their lead. I think it also is a reflection of, we're smaller organizations with limited resources, so how we deploy our resources, I think we're very conservative about change in that. So, but I think over time, if the trend that the ACE has been showing, they've been doing this survey since 2001, and internationalization activities have grown, it'll be interesting for us to see, because we would like to do this survey again in the future, to see how, if that trend occurs in libraries too, if this is just beginning and growing in libraries.
Thank you. So how do library internationalization efforts differ from or reflect campus internationalization efforts?
Okay, I'll speak to that too a little bit. So my last answer was more about the survey results, and this is more about what we're doing. So I think one way that we reflect each other is we found that when there are campus committees related to internationalization, libraries are pretty well represented on them. So we are at the table, we're part of the planning, we're part of the process when there is a significant process at a university. I think that's interesting. I think one thing that stood out as a difference, which Steve touched on earlier, is that many campuses have offices dedicated to internationalization, or they have full-time people. I mean, as Steve mentioned, most libraries don't have anyone coordinating it at all, maybe the director. And obviously campuses have much more to coordinate. We wouldn't probably have a big office for this in most libraries, but just that lack of coordination does demonstrate a lack of focus and a lack of prioritization, I think, in libraries. We've just been much more haphazard about it. I think another difference we found in things that are being done on campuses is related to professional development. So we found that ACE found that 48% of academic institutions support things like international conference travel, even though they had noted there was a slight decline from survey before. But only 31% of libraries give any funding to this, and that's mainly doctoral institutions. And we found that 46% of libraries reported absolutely no support for any type of professional activity related to internationalization. So that was significant. And we're curious to see if what ACE is showing, that there's been a decline in support for this from 2006 to 2011, what will that mean for libraries in the next few years? Money's tight everywhere, so is this something, it'll be just interesting to see, does it grow or does it decline in libraries? Let's see, and related to just services and programs that institutions and libraries offer, the ACE reports an increase to study abroad, international student recruitment, and joint and branch international campuses. I found this really interesting because, if you read the Chronicle of Higher Education or any of the higher ed literature, these are the things that are in the news all the time. Branch campuses, international students, we need the money, these are the hot topics. So it was interesting to see that those are the areas that institutions report putting more focus. They also reported, though, that even though they're developing these services, that there hasn't been a corresponding increase in support services for these students in these new programs. So maybe universities are bringing in a lot more international students, but they aren't creating new programs and services and help these students. And we think that this is an area of potential growth for libraries. I mean, it's something we've been doing. As Lori was mentioning, the activities that libraries have been engaged in, a lot of them relate to these. International students, study abroad. These are things that we've been doing for years. But how can we be more strategic, and how can we be seen as a real partner to support these new activities or these increased activities going on on campuses, I think is a real place for us. And I also wanted to mention something that I personally found really fascinating. The ACE reported that the number of schools with globally focused GER, so general education requirements, had increased, but there had been a decrease in foreign language requirements since 2001. And they wonder, in their report, they mention, are universities replacing depth with breadth? And I think that's a really intriguing question as internationalization grows. Is it this shift from this more focused language and traditional things that libraries have been supporting with our collections and our area studies program to this more broad, health issues in Africa sort of course? How are universities developing this? And just thinking about, I had some note here. What that means for traditional library services and our traditional strengths. So if there is this decrease in foreign language, but libraries in our survey report that collections are one of the biggest areas of international activity and area studies support, and liaison activity is really big. It'll be interesting to see if over time that somehow changes, if universities are making a shift.
Thank you. So I'm going to maybe flip this a little bit. You mentioned that library services from all over the library are involved in supporting campus internationalization. But I'm curious if your survey, or if you have any thoughts about what kind of library organizational structures might be most conducive to building these kinds of services and support.
Yeah, I can take this one, I guess. I think if you look at the organizational structures that libraries reported, there's generally a lack of structure. But if you look at the types of services being offered, and especially where things are trending, because within the survey, and though we can't see any trends or differences, we can certainly see activities that might be more emergent. So, for example, co-curricular type activities, support for ESL programs, support for study abroad, support for international outreach on topics that are more campus-wide to build more international perspectives and understanding. And these really fall within the service profile and service categories. So it strikes me through the activities that libraries are engaged in and through the structures that we see that there really is a much greater role for coordinating international type services and making it more of a service profile, service initiative than in the past. It's really been more linked to collection building, and even the liaison activities focused on the strength of the language specialists within the library to make resources accessible. But we see more of a trend towards reference services, but also instructional and outreach services that are engaging the students, the campus, and also the increased number of international students that we need to help out.
So have you seen any difference in the way that BA, MA, and PhD libraries seem to differ in their approaches to these internationalization efforts?
I'll take that one. But before answering this, I just want to note again that I can only speak with regard to our respondent libraries, as our response rate from both bachelor's and master's institutions was too low to allow for anything generalizable. And all institutions reflect their own institutional culture and realities. And so larger PhD granting research universities have large-scale internationalization-related projects going on, such as like working with international campuses and international digitization projects. Over half of our respondent doctoral institutions reported having staff focused on international interlibrary loan, and were more likely to systematically collect materials from other countries and reflective of their curriculum, certainly. However, with regard to services and instruction, such as liaison activities with foreign language and international studies departments, and instruction for international students, bachelor's and master's level respondent institutions reported these activities with just about the same frequency as doctoral institutions, as I believe Steve was just alluding to. There was some involvement with study abroad programs at all levels of institutions, ranging from liaison relationships to having a role in leading programs. Doctoral institutions were more likely to have received funding for internationalization-related activities and more likely to have support for internationalization professional development.
Great, thank you. So just to sort of build off of your professional development question, a question just came in that I think might actually fit in well with that. So have these internationalization efforts affected the types of skills libraries are looking for in the librarians they hire? And that may not be something that was in your survey, but I'm curious if you've heard anything anecdotally, if it's not.
I can speak to that a little bit. We considered including a question on that, but we did not. And it was when I was reviewing the ACE summary, like key findings, for the American Council on Education in academic institutions, that was one of the key findings for them. That I'll read it here. It says, hiring faculty with international experience is more common, but faculty tenure and promotion policies are often overlooked. And they just said that there's a notable increase in institutions considering international background and experience in hiring decisions. We have a hard time figuring out how to get that question or what that would mean in libraries. I would say that in my library that it has made a difference. It is something that's looked at because it's valued in the organization. So it's one thing that our organization looks at. And actually, I've just lost the question. I've just gotten myself confused. Let me look at it.
I could
yeah,
jump.
maybe you can talk about it too.
I don't think it's changed our hiring practices for general positions outside of what we call international area studies types posts. But what we find when we are looking for people with international experience or that expertise, it's very difficult to find qualified candidates who can fit these positions. Running a search for someone who can do Middle East studies, who can support various African languages, for example, is very difficult. And it's really a struggle to find people qualified and who both with the library skills and the content international skills. And if this trend is continuing, if we that there's no pipeline of professionals willing or able to fill this niche, and if we see a growth in internationalization, we're going to be in trouble in that we won't be able to provide these basic services. If we're going to be called upon to provide tours in Mandarin for a growing Chinese student population or other services in languages outside of English, it's going to be a struggle for us, and it's something we need to think about as we recruit people into professions, and also something to talk to our library programs so that they're inserting that into the training that people get.
I'd also just like to add that in the subsequent interviews that I did with library deans and directors that came up as well as something really to look to into the future in terms of growing our profession internationally through library school curriculum, through recruiting international students into our profession that will then be the future individuals that get hired into positions, and that there is an increasing value being placed on this.
Thank you.
I think it also, oh.
No, Liz, please, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it also helps when you have people with some sort of familiarity with these issues now dealing with this greater, global world. So at my last institution, for example, we had in my department a lot of graduate students who did their field work abroad. So it helped that I had lived abroad and tried to do research abroad myself, to know some of the issues that they would be encountering when they were in a developing country or trying to access resources. And I just think different pieces of internationalization are useful in different ways in all the different things that we do. So just thought I'd throw that in.
Great. So what do you think are the areas for growth?
I would like to just mention that I think one of the biggest areas for growth is collaboration. So I think because what we've seen is that the library was not even mentioned in the ACE survey, and that we're not thought of in that way by a lot of people in higher education, but we are doing a lot of activities, and we are at the table at a lot of these institutions. So what can we do to make ourselves more visible? How can we collaborate more with the offices that are working on internationalization issues on our campuses? I mean, how can we be more strategic about those partnerships and committees and offices? I think that's a huge area for growth for libraries, is this strategic focus on these issues. And then just a couple other things. I think what Steve or Lori were mentioning earlier, the new focuses for universities are on international student recruitment and some branch campuses and study abroad. So I think even though we have been supporting those, how can we grow that? How can we make ourselves more visible in those programs? I think are areas that libraries can be looking into. I don't know if Steve and Lori have anything they wanted to add to that.
Okay. Well, how does this research fit into other conversations that are happening around the role of libraries in global campus initiatives, such as discussed at recent meetings at Duke and Indiana?
I can take that question. Over the past couple of years, it seems to be there's more conversations about the role of I guess the campus legacy or library legacy in internationalization, which is really focused on collection building, liaison services, expert services to our foreign language area studies departments. And I think about 2 years ago there was a meeting at Duke funded by the Mellon Foundation where they were discussing the roles and especially resource needs and service needs, and then a similar meeting also at Indiana University that was focused on changes within area studies. And it seems that the survey results point this way in these discussions, that as campuses further internationalize and there's more of a broad-based curriculum, and there's the breadth versus depth scenario, we have more of a need within the library to support other areas that might not have been on the radar. So, for example, global health, as Liz mentioned, also a lot of our STEM engineering programs are heavily invested internationally, doing consulting work, development work, but also many of their students and graduate students are coming from abroad. So this presents a challenge to the campuses, as we see, but also to libraries on how do we provide services to these research problems as they broaden to have an international or global focus, but also as our students and communities have more of an international perspective. How do we embed that and integrate it into all of the other services that we're trying to provide?
Great. So this question came in from Linda through YouTube. So do you think the library can map itself effectively in terms of internationalization strategy if it's aligned with the library strategic and the university strategic plan? So, I mean, I'll jump in on this one. I do think that the library can map itself effectively in terms of the internationalization strategy. You know, I'm thinking about my institution in particular. One of our new strategic plan is all about student engagement and interaction and that international experience. And, you know, we offer a number of classes, especially for our international students that come here as undergrads, on, you know, how to basically survive in American culture, what it means to be engaging in an academic research paper, plagiarism, copyright. Those are things that I think we can, and that is part of our strategic plan. That outreach, that engagement is really about interacting with the international students that come here. We don't have as much interaction with the students that go abroad. We don't really have a very strong program there yet, but I do think that that also falls into something that the library can do to map itself to the larger university strategic plan. And from my perspective, I think it's important for us to put the library in a position where we are clearly indicating that this is one of our goals moving forward, that internationalization, that the all of the things that sort of come along with that sort of being a citizen of a global community, which are part of what, as a university, we're trying to prepare our students to be able to do once they leave here.
Great, yes, I totally agree.
I agree as well, and I think it's clear that libraries are already doing a lot of these activities. It's just not written into strategic plans or mission statements as often. So it's really how to acknowledge those activities amongst all the other things that libraries are doing. And sometimes these activities fall under other service structures or collection structures, so they may not rise to the level of being called international. They're just, these are our patrons, these are the research needs of our faculty and students, and we're serving those. So we may not be contextualizing them in that international manner, but I think in order to speak to our university colleagues and administration, it might be helpful to include this strategically in our planning. But I think also we need to acknowledge that we're doing these activities so that we can better coordinate and communicate amongst each other to enhance them and make them better.
So my follow-up to that, I'm sorry for interrupting, would just basically be, do you think it's more important for us to have it in our strategic plan, or is it more important for us to basically pull out those pieces of internationalization in our annual reports?
I would say both, because I think you need to be intentional about it. I think that's what the strategic plan does, and I think the annual reports are important too, because you know, all the assessment talk these days too is all about how libraries demonstrate their value to their institutions. So if this is a priority, strategic priority for our institutions, we need to be showing them how we're contributing to that, and being able to document and you know, this sort of myriad of types of things that we've been doing. And for example, at our institution, we've been doing some stuff related to study abroad, but working on this paper and then working with Laurie, who's been doing a lot of work with study abroad for a long time, made me realize, oh, you know, we've been doing some stuff, but we haven't been really coordinated and intentional and strategic about how we're going to do that. So we made a little committee, and we're 2 people working on it now, and they've been meeting with the offices and coming up with the offices of study abroad. Our campus has a couple of offices. And so for us, it's been good. This survey, I saw there was another question. One of the other viewers asked about how this has affected our own work at our institutions. And I think, just becoming aware of these things helps you think about them in a more strategic way.
So
yeah, I would.
Sorry, Lori, go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree with both Liz and Steve, and just kind of reiterate that as universities are placing internationalization in their strategic plans more and more, and library strategic plans often reflect university strategic goals, I think it's really important for us to consider including internationalization both in our strategic plans for the reasons that Liz and Steve mentioned, as well as in our annual reports, and really kind of go at this a little bit more systematically. And in a sense, these are things that we've been doing for a long time, and we've never actually maybe thought about them in this kind of coherent strategic way, but I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's important at this juncture for us to be able to indicate the value that we bring to our university strategic goals, and that's one way we can do that.
Great. Thank you. So Liz mentioned that there were changes that were made at her institution based on her work on the survey. And so, Lori and Steve, I'd love to hear from you about whether or not your institutions have changed any of your internationalization efforts based on your survey results or your work on this committee.
Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, okay. I wouldn't say that there's already been change at our institution, and luckily we're already very internationalized and are very active in a variety of ways. But what we have initiated and plan to do is institute a library-wide assessment and review of our international activities, with the aim of having a shared notion of what success means in our international activities, and to better articulate what direction we're going, but also how to better coordinate these activities. With any large organization, it's often the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, and sometimes the right hand doesn't know if it's supposed to do something or the left hand's supposed to. And I think what we're trying to do is hopefully have a dialogue where we can better coordinate and articulate what our goals are and what activities we'd like to emphasize.
And I would say, realistically, no, not at this point. However, there are other external factors that are increasing how we're contributing to internationalization. For instance, our international student population is, being strategically grown, and it's happening quite rapidly on our campus, and so that is necessitating more emphasis being placed on international student orientations, information literacy instruction for international students, and other ways in which we can support international students. So we're starting to
looks like Lori may have just cut out.
Hello?
Hello? Lori, you still there?
Yeah. Anyway, so there are just demographic realities of our campus that are dictating the direction we're going in a little bit more rapidly than conversations that are just evolving at this point.
So I'm curious, what are your next steps for this survey, for the results that you're doing? What are your next steps there? Okay.
So in the study, we mentioned that we want to mirror ACE and collect longitudinal data. So, and we've mentioned this earlier. So one of our future plans is to repeat this study again in 5 years in order to track in a systematic way the ways in which academic libraries continue to support and facilitate campus internationalization, particularly at this juncture where there's increasing strategic focus in higher education on internationalization. So far, ACE has conducted their study 3 times in 5-year intervals, and I think we'd like to do that too. More imminently, We mentioned in the article a follow-up study focusing on in-depth interviews of library deans and directors to supplement this data. And that data have been collected and are in the process of being compiled. Also, in the article conclusion, we recommend development of best practices and assessment measures for library support of campus internationalization. Our next project that we haven't started yet is going to involve a focus on developing an assessment model or tool to measure the value that we bring and the contributions that we make to the strategic direction of campus internationalization.
Great. Thanks, Lori. So in our last 2 minutes, I just want to give all of you a chance to just give your closing thoughts.
Okay, I'll jump in. So as strategic campus internationalization initiatives are continuing to increase into the future, so will the involvement of academic libraries in many ways. Currently, our data suggests that internationalization is not well represented in our strategic or administrative documents, but I'm guessing that the next time we run this survey, we may see a change in this area. We live in this fundamentally global information age, and the work that we do supports the global knowledge society in many, many ways. So the challenge for us in libraries is to become more integrated into the higher education dialogue on internationalization, where we've largely been off the radar so far. So we hope that the study may be a step in that direction. Thanks.
Liz, Steve, any final thoughts?
I would just say, I mean, I said this earlier. To me, I would say my final thought is intentionality. So I think, you know, for libraries to be thinking intentionally about these issues, I think that's my final thought.
I guess I can echo my colleagues on that, but I think, and one thing I think the survey shows is that we're already doing a lot within libraries internationally, and I think it will be interesting to see, as we do subsequent surveys, any changes to that. But particularly, I hope it starts more conversations within libraries so that we start having some shared ideas of what success means internationally within libraries and are able to share that amongst institutions and really make headway so that all the work we're doing resonates a little bit further.
Yeah, as was mentioned earlier, the theme of collaboration into the future is really going to be important.
Well, I want to thank all of our panelists, Liz Cooper, Steve Witt, and Lori Kuttner, for joining us today. This has been a really great discussion. I'd also like to thank Sarah Steiner and John Lemazny for their organizational and technical support. Without you, this could never have happened. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if you would like to read Liz, Lori, and Steve's article, it is available now in the preprint section of the College and Research Libraries website, which is open source, open access for free online. Thank you. Thanks, Aviva.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.